All right, get ready because today we're going deep on a story. It's about international politics, family ties, and the power of remittances. We're headed to Pakistan. That's where former Prime Minister Imran Khan tried to use remittances. Well, he tried to use them as a political weapon against the government, after he was ousted from power back in 2022 and then jailed on charges he claims were politically motivated. He called on his supporters, especially overseas Pakistanis, to limit how much money they send back home. You'd think that would have a big impact, right?
It's a pretty bold move, for sure. Especially when you think about how much money we're talking about here, remittances make up a huge part of Pakistan's economy. I mean, they hit a record $34.1 billion in 2024 alone. So yeah, Khan's call to action could have really destabilized things.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. Remember, this is a deep dive, based on an article from Al Jazeera. And their reporting shows that remittances actually skyrocketed, instead of decreasing. In January 2025, it reached over $3 billion for the second month in a row. So Khan called for a boycott, and the exact opposite happened. What's going on here?
Well, to understand that, I think we need to look at the motivations behind these remittances. The Al Jazeera article has interviews with several overseas Pakistani workers. Their stories paint a really human picture of why this strategy backfired.
Okay, let's hear some of those stories. The article talks about this barber, Mohammed Wasim. He works in Qatar. He's a big Khan supporter, and he actually tried to follow through on the boycott. He told his family in Punjab he couldn't send money anymore.
I bet that didn't last very long.
You got it. Wasim actually had to start sending money again because his brothers rely on his support for their dairy business. It's a real reminder that for many overseas Pakistanis, remittances aren't about politics. They're about supporting their families.
It's like personal obligations sometimes outweigh political allegiances, right? And Wasim's story isn't the only one. The article also talks about a recent graduate named Ahmed Kabir, who lives in Saudi Arabia now. He joined his two brothers there. They've been sending money back home for years. That money supported their family and even paid for Kabir's university education.
So those remittances were his ticket to a better life? And now he's sending money back to support his own family.
Exactly. And Kabir makes a really interesting point. He says, if I tell my mother I can't send her money because Khan asked me not to, she'll probably tell me to go sit in jail with him.
Wow. It sounds like for a lot of these people, sending money home isn't really a choice. It's a necessity, an economic necessity, a lifeline for their loved ones.
You got it. And that feeling comes through loud and clear in the article. Another overseas worker they interviewed, Raja Babar Sarwar, he runs a restaurant in Jeddah. He says, I really don't care about politics or what any leader is saying. We are not here to do politics. We are here to earn. He sends back around $1,066 every month to support his family in Pakistan. And that's on top of what all of his employees send back. They all rely on those remittances just as much as he does.
So we're seeing this pattern, family comes first. It seems like Khan underestimated how important these remittances are, how deeply ingrained they are in the lives of everyday Pakistanis. But I'm guessing there's more to this story than just family ties, right? There must be some economic factors, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To really understand why Khan's plan failed, we need to bring in some analysis. The Al Jazeera article quotes an economist, Sajid Amin Baved. He calls remittances from overseas Pakistanis largely involuntary, especially those in Gulf countries. What he means is, these aren't optional expenses, but essential funds that families back home need to get by.
So even if someone supported Khan's boycott, they might not actually be able to do it because their family relies on that money.
That's a key point. And that's not even the whole story. There are actually some other interesting economic factors that help explain the increase in remittances, especially in January.
Okay, I'm listening. What else is going on?
Think about it this way. When the Pakistani rupee gets stronger, like it did recently against the US dollar, families back home, they suddenly need more rupees to buy the same stuff. So even if overseas workers are sending the same amount in dollars, they buys less back in Pakistan.
So they're like working harder just to stay in the same place.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. And that makes those remittances even more important. But there's another side to this too. The government, the Pakistani government, has been cracking down on illegal money transfers. And that's actually boosted confidence in the official banking system.
Oh, interesting. So people feel safer now sending money through the banks because they know it'll actually get there, and those transfers are easier to track, right? Which explains why we're seeing a bigger increase in those remittance numbers. It all makes sense.
Exactly. And it shows this really interesting dynamic in a lot of countries. Remittances aren't just about family. They're a major economic force. Think about the bigger picture. For places like Pakistan, the Philippines, Mexico, remittances are often bigger than other types of foreign exchange, like exports, or even direct investment.
Wow, so we're talking about a lifeline for entire economies. So remittances must be pretty important for politicians.
Oh, definitely. Politicians know that the diaspora has a lot of economic power, so they often try to win them over. for votes and for those remittances. It's a balancing act for sure, appealing to overseas communities without making them upset.
Yeah, like walking a tightrope. And we see this all over the world, right? Leaders trying to use the diaspora's money for themselves, but as we saw in Pakistan, that can backfire if it goes against why people send money in the first place.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Khan's plan. It looks like he didn't realize how strong those family ties are and how much those remittances are needed. It's a good example of how economics often wins out over politics, no matter how popular the leader is.
So what do we learn? What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think it shows us how complicated these relationships are between countries, their diaspora communities, and economics. Remittances are a two-sided coin. They can be good, bringing stability and support, but they can also create weaknesses.
And I guess it's a reminder that human relationships, like the ones behind these remittances, often matter more than political plans. Family and responsibility to loved ones. They often come first. It really makes you think about the human side of all this, right? We always talk about these big, abstract ideas. But in the end, it's about people trying to live their lives and take care of their families.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something we often forget when we talk about politics. We focus on the numbers and the policies. But real people, they're the ones affected by these things.
That's so true. We've talked a lot about Pakistan today. But this story, it's bigger than just one country. We've mentioned it a bit. But I want to talk more about the global impact of remittances. You said that other countries rely on this money too?
Yeah, absolutely. What's happening in Pakistan, it's not unique. If you look at the Philippines, for instance, remittances are almost 10% of their GDP. And in Mexico, remittances are actually more than their oil revenue. They're the biggest source of foreign money. It's huge for lots of countries.
That's amazing. So this idea of politicians using remittances to help themselves, could that happen in other countries too?
It definitely could. Anytime you have people sending lots of money back home, that gives politicians a chance to use it for themselves. And the more a country depends on that money, the more important it becomes.
It's interesting to think about, and kind of scary too. If someone could control that flow of money, it makes you think about how economics and politics are connected and how they affect regular people.
For sure. And this is where you come in, our listener. We've been talking about Pakistan today, but we're not done with this conversation.
Yeah, as a deep dive, it's really just the beginning.
Exactly. So now it's your turn. What other examples can you think of where remittances are really important? Could politicians use them in those places? What about the ethical side of things? Do some research. Think about these questions and tell us what you find. Maybe it'll be our next deep dive.
And that's it for today. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something new. Until then, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep learning. It really makes you think about the human side of economics, doesn't it? We often talk about these big, abstract concepts, but at the end of the day, it's all about people trying to make a living and take care of their families.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that often gets lost in the political rhetoric. We focus on the numbers, the policies, but it's important to remember real people are affected by these decisions.
So true. Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about Pakistan, but this story has implications beyond just one country, right? We've touched on it a little bit, but I want to dig a little deeper into this global impact of remittances. You mentioned that other countries rely heavily on these funds, too.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just happening in Pakistan. Take the Philippines, for example. Remittances account for almost 10% of their GDP. And in Mexico, they actually surpass oil revenues as a source of foreign currency. It's a major economic force in many parts of the world.
That's incredible. So this idea of politicians trying to use remittances for their own gain, could we see that play out in other countries too?
It's definitely possible. Anytime you have a large diaspora sending significant amounts of money back home, it creates this potential leverage point for political leaders. And the more a country's economy relies on those remittances, the higher the stakes become.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about, and a little unsettling too. When you consider how those flows of money could be manipulated, it definitely raises some big questions about the relationship between economics, politics, and, the well-being of people.
Absolutely, and that's where you come in, our listener.
Right? This deep dive is really just the beginning.
Exactly. So we're turning it over to you now. What other examples can you think of where remittances play a major role? Could they be used as political leverage? What are the ethical implications? Think about it. Do some research. Explore these questions. And let us know what you find. Maybe it'll even spark our next deep dive.
That's all for this episode. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep learning.